I'm Erica Labuzan Lopez, licensed marriage and family therapist and licensed professional counselor in League City, Texas, and also the owner of the Center for Couples Counseling. Welcome to my channel. I'm so glad that you're here. If you could go ahead and give me a like or subscribe, that would really help me out, and I really want your comments down below with topics for future videos. The channel will be based around marriage, relationships, therapy in general, and minimalism. So I need to know what you guys want me to talk about, what you want me to share my resources on. So go ahead and do that now. It would really help me out. Today, I'm going to be going over a tool that I've used with many couples over the years, and actually for myself and my own relationship, probably many times over the past year. It's a really quick and easy tool, nothing complicated, but I found it to be very powerful in helping us make decisions and really move forward with what we need to do on things that are a bit more complex, some, a bit nuanced, and right now there's just so many decisions coming at us. So I think it's a little bit easier for us to become stuck and overwhelmed with information. This tool is going to help you move through that, and I'm going to go through it step by step with you, giving some brief examples. There's also a link in the description bar down below that has a link to the digital download. So I'd suggest you go ahead and do that now so that you can have it in front of you. It has written instructions, some background about the tool, and also a template at the end. So that's gonna help you. So today we're gonna really go into this tool by walking through some examples related to school in the fall. I know that all of the parents out there are making this very difficult decision. There's so much information coming at us. Things are changing every day, and it can be extremely overwhelming. What happens, I think, when we have information coming at us at the rate that it is anyway on normal circumstances, and then times a million in the current situation that we're in, we see a phenomenon called cognitive dissonance. And what that means is basically we're having competing thoughts, needs, behaviors, wants. All of those things are going on in the brain at the same time. And what it does is it just creates space. And that space leads to anxiety. So, for example, you may want to send your kids back to school. That might be better for everybody's mental health. However, you have concerns about the medical risk involved. And so here we have competing thoughts, both of which I believe are valid and have evidence behind them to support them. So it's not as if you're competing between things that one is completely illogical or unreasonable and the other is not. It's usually they both have valid points, and it's hard to figure out how to weigh those things, which again, is creating space in the brain, and then the brain, for me at least, kind of just turns into mush. Makes it very difficult to figure out how to move forward and make decisions. And then that lack of decision makes us feel even more stuck in that we have no idea what the heck we're doing. So that's where I found a lot of my couples over several decisions in life, really, but especially here where we're making hundreds of decisions and pivots that we never imagined we were going to have to make in the first place. And now here comes another really big decision that I think is difficult for most people. So that's what I want to do today, is walk through step by step the tool that I use to make any big decision, but even more importantly, when it comes to feeling stuck, it's a good place to put down some of your thoughts on paper, get them out of your brain, figure out how to sort them out, and have a bit more objective methodology that we can use to make some movement here, right? Because we're going to have to make this decision, and we really want to feel confident that we're doing that correctly. Now, when I say correctly, kind of a strange word, right? Because there's no right or wrong choice in these situations, in my opinion. I feel we're at an impossible impasse, and we're all doing the best that we can for our own families. So as we're going through this, I'm going to be giving some examples for the sake of demonstrating the tool, but I really need you all to be honest with yourselves and with your partners about what's important for your own situation and your own family. That is going to look so different for all of us. Every single person watching this video, every single person who downloads the tool for personal use, every single client, every single friend, everybody you know, all of these charts at the very end of this exercise are going to look completely different. Nobody's is going to look the same. That's totally okay. And there may be some feelings that come up for you as you're looking at this, some judgments about what you decide to put on the chart and where. And that's completely understandable. But I want you to know that nobody's going to see your chart. You and your partner are the only people who are going to see what it ends up looking like at the end. And that'll help you feel confident, really. Like, you don't have to worry about what anybody else thinks about what you're putting down, or how important that's going to be, because it doesn't matter what so and so down the block is doing. Makes no difference into what you need for your family. And so I encourage you to put those judgments aside, to put your own judgments aside, and make space for your own needs and honor your own family and your situation, because nobody else knows. Nobody else knows what it is to be you. And that's going to require you to be honest. You and your partner have to have an honest conversation about this, and that may not always be comfortable. So I've built in some measures to help you kind of move through the tool, even when those things arise. But I do want to give you that permission and encourage you to do what you need to do as we're looking at these things. Again, I'm going to be giving some brief examples. They're not my statements on what I feel is the best decision. They're not my statements on what I think you need to do or what anybody needs to do. I'm pretty much just going to take some generic things, and there's always room to expand on those things. I'm just going to give some examples for the sake of demonstrating the tool. Again, let's go ahead and walk through this tool step by step. Step number one, the easiest part, let's go ahead and draw a grid. So we're going to do this with 2 columns, and I want these to be labeled advantages and disadvantages. So this is where some people look at the tool and think, well, this is, it's a pros cons list. And in some ways it is, but I think actually a far more powerful tool than pros cons, and you'll see as we go through it further. But I think it's important to label these advantages and disadvantages. And we can also think about that as advantages equals potential gains, and disadvantages is potential losses. So that might be another way you want to label it. It's just a little bit different, but it can actually change your perception as you're going through things that are relevant for you and your family. And then in terms of rows, most people will probably have two options you're going between, but you can actually do this for as many things as you need. So if your district is offering 3 potential alternatives, or if you're considering the district's 2 offerings plus maybe an outside option, such as doing a different type of homeschooling program or switching to private school. So, this is really going to be specific to you. Most people probably have 2. And so it's going to be a 2x2 grid. You can draw that, or you can go ahead and use the template that's in the download. And then you'll want to label each of those options on the side there for the rows. So in person, online, etc. Then we move on to step number 2. And this is where we start filling in the chart. I recommend doing this as individuals first before you come together as a couple, for a few reasons. One, because there's going to be so many ideas flowing out. I actually consider this part to be a bit of a brain dump, and that may become overloaded, or you may get in conflict a little bit quicker by trying to fill this chart out together. There's going to be some differences there. And so I recommend setting aside time to do this each as individuals. I want you to do this part fairly quickly. You've probably already been thinking through several aspects of this, read articles, been on the moms group on Facebook, talked to your friends at work, whatever it may be. So you already have a number of ideas, I believe. And so, there's no reason to spend time over analyzing this or getting too caught up in each point you want to make. It's really with the idea of we need to get everything out of our brain. Right now, all of our brains are like, again, mush, right? There's just so much going on. I'm kind of reminded of that computer game. This may be dating me a bit, but the computer game from back in the day where you had a bar at the bottom that you would move across the screen, and there was a ball that would bounce around and try to hit the bricks that were at the top, and your goal was to hit all the bricks and catch the ball with the bar. And that's kind of how I think about our thoughts when really anytime anxiety is taking over, but especially now when there's so much competing information and incoming ideas. things are coming from so many sources. So I kind of feel like our brains are doing that, but at 100 times speed, where that ball is just going all over the place, bouncing up and down, all around, hitting the wall. And it kind of feels like we don't have control of it. No matter how fast we're moving that bar at the bottom, we're trying to contain those things, but we just can't. And I actually don't think we should. I don't think we need to hold all of that in our brain space. It's really not helpful. So I love this part of the exercise because it's a chance to like slow all of that down and get it all out on paper. So I don't want you to overthink it. Just anything you can think of, big or small. There's going to be some points that you want to make that are huge and maybe nuanced that we might want to come back and fine tune a bit, like risk of exposure. There's probably several things under that you may need to consider. But go ahead and write that down and just get that out. And then if we need to fine tune it, we can later. Some things may be small, like if your kids are at home, now you're responsible for lunches in a bit of a different way. And that might need to go on your list. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter how big or small the issue is. We just want to get it all out onto the paper so that we can see it a little bit more clearly. So again, set aside some time to do this individually. As you're making this list, you may notice some things that pop up for you, some feelings or judgments as you're deciding what goes where and what things you really need to look at. And that's totally okay. However, that can also keep us stuck if we give in to those feelings, or especially the judgments, which I think is the bigger part about the feelings that we have, or where we should be putting something on the chart, or what should or shouldn't go there. That can become a distraction. And so for that reason, if you have the digital download, there's a spot there for observations. Go ahead and keep that next to you as you're filling out the grid, and then just jot that down. If you're not using that, you can just grab a piece of paper, right? Or even a notes on your phone, whatever you need to just go ahead, jot that down, observe it, don't judge it, don't worry about it, put it down. You can come back to it later. You can process that if you want to, or you can go over that with your therapist, kind of, what came up, because I think you'll have some interesting observations. So we'll move on to step 3 now, which is combining the list between you and your partner. This is where some conflict can arise, but I think that it's going to be a similar vein to what we just talked about. As that happens, as tension maybe builds between you and your partner, that's totally fine. It's normal. It's probably going to happen. It happened with my husband and I as we were doing this exercise last week. It's totally fine. And actually what we found is it led to some pretty meaningful and valuable conversations, some observations or things we didn't fully understand about each other as we've been experiencing this pandemic and all the transitions that were made and different things that happened during lockdown. And so that was super valuable and really added to our discussion. However, it was necessary to go ahead and, again, write them down, jot them down. That's something for a later conversation. That's not something that we want to work on during this step because, again, it's going to impede our progress. And our goal here is to take an objective look and be able to make a decision by the end of this. So make sure that you have space and paper and some method that you'll be able to go ahead and do that. It's probably going to be fairly simple if you and your partner see things in similar ways, and you can just go ahead and see, okay, what do we have overlapping? Let's get that on our clean new chart right away. We can boop, 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 and get that pretty quickly. This is also part of the stage where you can clean things up a bit. So if you'll notice from the example that I made, you may see masks in the advantages and disadvantages boxes of the in-person option for school. And I did that intentionally so that we could get an idea of how we may need to clarify that. And step 3 is where you would do that. So, this could be a conversation between you and your partner about, okay, why do you see masks as an advantage? Oh, okay, because of, limiting spread. That makes sense. So we might even want to cross masks out and change the wording of that. The mask requirement will lead to limiting the spread of the virus, right? And that's a valid point, and that may be more important for different families. But I think it's a good point, and that would be a better way to say it so that when you're coming back through for the next step, you'll have some clarity on that. Disadvantages, you may have health concerns about your child wearing a mask for extended periods of time, right? Or you don't know if it's realistic or that they'll be comfortable. those are all valid points as well. And actually that's 3 different points, right? So I think that that's a good time as you're combining lists. Let's go ahead and clarify and get as specific as we can. I would still consider setting a timer around this step, maybe 10 to 15 minutes, depending on how verbally expressive you and your partner are. We do not want to overly go into this. If there is conflict about a point between you and your partner where one of you really feels like this needs to be on the list and the other person doesn't agree, I would do a very quick exchange about that. Here's why I believe it should be on the list. And then the listener would say, okay, that makes sense, or it doesn't. And then from there, we can decide. It's really not going to make a huge difference in the end. And I think you'll see why when we get to the next steps. So don't get stuck there. It's just not, it's counterproductive and probably going to lead to some conflict between the two of you. Jot that conflict down, put it on the list, and you can move forward to the next step. So that brings us to step number 4, which I think is what sets this apart from a traditional list or other ways of looking at decision making. It's my favorite part. It's going back through as a couple, and you will do this step together as a couple, and evaluating each single point that you've made between this chart. In all the quadrants, we're going to look at every single thing. And I want you to, in the space to the left of the bullet points, make a determination, a ranking, I guess would be a better word, from 1 to 10. How important is this in your decision-making process? So, that could be a little different. It might not be how important it is in your life, but how important is it in us being able to make this decision with confidence? How does this factor rank? 1 being not important at all. Okay, it's a change in our routines maybe, right? Maybe like lunch. That might be something kind of on the smaller side, on the smaller scale. To this is very important in our decision-making factor and really is a make or break. 10, the most important something could be. So you'll go through each point. Again, similar, if there's conflict there, there can be some compromising going on. Don't spend too much time. We want to get a general sense. It's, again, probably not going to make a huge difference. So go ahead and go through that each single point. That moves us on to step number 5, which is the interpretation. And this is where things can get a little bit tricky, although I've done this with numerous couples over the years, all kinds of issues that we're deciding on, all different types of couples and different things. And it's a little easier than you probably think. These numbers tend to stick out at us. We could look at the chart very quickly and see, yeah, now I get it. Now this makes sense and it's very clear. But I do want to walk through a few examples because there is some interpretation required here. So example number 1, as you can see, the points are fairly easily distributed. We can see an equal number of points kind of going on in each category. So before we've even assigned values of importance, it's a bit unclear. Oh my goodness. Okay, listen, help it all. Now I'm just like back where I started with everything kind of competing. But if you want to go ahead and do some quick math, add up the values that you ranked each point, and then you can get a total number for that grid. So now we have a better idea of, okay, this is how important the advantages of option 1 really are. I have some numerical data to look at. And I've based these examples off of typical charts that I've seen with my clients, for myself, and with my family and friends. So these are some of the most common options that you may find. And we can see from example number 1, we have higher numbers in both the advantages of option 1 and disadvantages of option 2. So it starts to become clear. Okay, we have valid points, we have things that are important in every single box, but it seems a clear answer that the gains of option number 1 and the losses of option number 2 would lead us to believe that option number 1 is going to be the best possible choice for our family, right? Because you've made the chart specific to your own family. Another thing that I would personally look at if this was my chart is I see that there are only 10s, which is the most important factor to me in, again, advantages of option number 1 and disadvantages of option number 2. So that would tell me that of all of the points, all of the thoughts, all of the things that we are considering here, that is where the highest value items are showing up for us. And I think that that is essential in our decision making. What is going to make the most impact on our lives? And that's really what we need to do. So pretty easy decision here. Option number 1 would be the best choice. Example number 2. So here's where it can, again, it's pretty confusing, right? What is going on here? We've got lots of ideas, lots of things to consider for both the advantages and disadvantages of option number 1. And for option number 2, we have less points in general. Option number 2, also both sides are fairly equal in terms of number. If we were to add everything up, their rankings are fairly similar. So this is where you may find yourself confused. Okay, what do I do? But again, we want to go to those totals. So we're looking at the highest number of values here, which would be present in the disadvantages of option number 1. So that has some pretty compelling evidence, I think. We also see that there's 3 10s happening in the disadvantages of option number 1. And there's also 1 10 in the advantages of option number 1. But I think if we're looking at it, okay, there's several things here in the disadvantages that are very high values for us. And option number 2, there's pretty much equal gains and losses. There's really nothing there that's drawing us in a certain way. So that kind of becomes a little bit less important as we're looking at the overall list. And so for this one, I would say with that extremely higher number, disadvantages, and nothing hugely a disadvantage for option number 2, those potential losses present in option number 1 combined with neutral sort of gains versus losses in option number 2. In this case, I would choose option number 2, and I would feel extremely confident that that was the best choice for us. Now, this chart I've seen here in example number 3 a few times. It doesn't happen that much, and it's really present when ambivalence is high anyway for that person or for that couple. They have trouble making decisions in the first place. And also remember, our brains are really, really, really good at coming up with reasons to do things. It goes back to that cognitive dissonance. If we're leaning towards one direction, but we're not sure, our anxiety will automatically make it easier to come up with a million things for the other side. And it's just how the brain works. We're really, really, really good at it. We can talk ourselves into and out of almost anything, to be honest. So this chart is where it gets a little confusing. The points are a bit unevenly distributed. There's nothing sticking out to me there when I would initially look at it. And the numbers are fairly confusing. Nothing is obviously a different value than other things. And because there's different number of items in each box, it's just all around confusing. So if you find that your chart looks more like this one, I would do what's a weighted average for each quadrant. So you can see, okay, yeah, I have a lot of points over here, but none of them are very highly ranked. So it's kind of skewing this total. I'm a little confused about this. The way you would do that, you add up all the values to get that total and then divide it by the number of items. And so as you can see in the first box here, I've added up those totals to 31, divided it by the number of points that I had in there, which is 5, which leads the average idea that's in that box is about a 6.2. And so we did that for all of the quadrants here. We can look at the boxes and say, okay, I only have three ideas that I put here in the advantages of option number 2, but they all ranked a 10. Again, powerful. That's why I love this tool with the numbers and really looking at what's the most important thing and how do these rank, because now it becomes extremely clear. Yeah, there's not that many reasons. I don't have, 500 things to say about it, but every single thing in that one ranks extremely highly. They all rank a 10. They are the most important thing compared to these other boxes of a 6, a 5, and a 4. I can live with those. I don't know if I can live outside of the advantages of option number 2. So that would be the choice here. That's going to be the best choice and the most meaningful and impactful on my life. So I hope that you found this tool helpful in both a verbal explanation on this video, but also with the download and some written instructions how to go through it. Again, I've used it so many times in my life to make decisions on many different topics. So keep this, use it for whatever you want. I did go through some options about school. I know that's coming up for all of us parents, and it just feels like an impossible decision. But we can find a better objective way to look at this data so that we can make a decision that we feel confident about and be able to move forward with. And I think that frees up space for other things in our minds, which we really need these days. And I hope some self-care and couple time. That's what I would recommend doing with that extra space. So I want to hear about that. I want to hear if this tool was helpful or what you're doing with your extra time now that you've made a decision. Remember, you may have to come back to this in a few weeks as circumstances are changing all the time, but now you'll have a method and you'll probably have a combined chart, so you can probably quickly update that and go through and rerun the numbers. It's extremely helpful to be able to have a methodology, a way to make these decisions. And go ahead over to my website, centerforcouplescounseling.com. I have some other great blogs and resources on there, and if you want to connect, you can find me through that. I'll see you next time.